Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Morning.
Welcome to our first ever UMass Boston retired faculty virtual gathering. As much as I must miss seeing you all in person, it's great that we have this opportunity to gather from the comfort of our own homes this morning. I understand that many of you have been busy in many different endeavors since our retirement. Professor Marion Winfrey works with North Shore Community Health Center on their conversion to telehealth. Professor Emerita Diane Paul has had visiting appointments at many institutions in and outside the US. Professor Joan Arches is the academic director of 3 Point Foundation. Professor Lloyd Schwartz is busy as poet laureate in Somerville and working on a new book. Professor Emeritus Brian Thompson has been busy with a radio show and a nonprofit that he co-founded. The list goes on, and with impressive projects that have occurred after retirement. What an accomplished group. We'll have time following the speaking program to chat about these endeavors and others after. I'd like to acknowledge the retired faculty and administration that have passed away this past year. From the College of Education and Human Development, Peter Taylor, Vincent Christiani. From the College of Liberal Arts, Winston Chong and Melissa Shook. From the College of Management, Mary Lou Roberts. From the College of Science and Math, Patrick O'Neill, George Saltzman, Mike Mansoyan, Jack Lutz, and Fawad Safwat. Please join me in a moment of silence in their memory. This morning's program will feature remarks by new Chancellor Marcelo Suarez Orozco and Interim Provost Emily McDermott, presentations from the 2019 Faculty Career Development Award recipients, the announcement of the 2020 recipients, and some words from our fellow retired faculty members. It's now an honor to introduce our first speaker, the new UMass Boston Chancellor, Marcelo Suarez Orozco. Chancellor Marcelo Suarez Orozco assumed the role of Chancellor of the University of Massachusetts, Boston on August 1. Most recently, he served as the inaugural UCLA Wasserman Dean at UCLA's Graduate School of Education and Information Studies. His research focuses on cultural psychology and psychological anthropology, with an emphasis on education, globalization, and immigration. His award-winning books and edited volumes have been published by Harvard University, Stanford University, and the New York University Press, and others. A member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the National Academy of Education trustee of the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching, a member of the Board of Advisors of the Thomas Mann House, and recipient of the Mexican Order of the Aztec Eagle. Dr. Suarez Orozco has served as special advisor to the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, The Hague, Netherlands. His distinguished career in academia includes prior roles at Harvard University and NYU. At Harvard, he served as the Victor S. Thomas Professor of Education, the co-founder and co-director of the Harvard Immigration Project, and founding member of the executive committee of the David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies. At NYU, he served as the inaugural Courtney Sale Ross University Professor of Globalization and Education. Chancellor, on behalf of all retired faculty, we'd welcome you to the University of Massachusetts, Boston. We're thrilled to have you as our Chancellor of this great institution. I now pass you the virtual microphone.
Thank you kindly, Professor Looney and colleagues. I hope you can hear me well. I bring you greetings and a deep sense of gratitude for our retired faculty's continued and enormous contribution to our university's life, to the vibrancy of our work, and to the academic reputation of ours, Boston's public research university. What I would like to do this morning, if I may, is share a little bit about my background, share a little bit about the state of our university from my perspective, and then share with you a few thoughts as to our future directions moving forward. As Professor Looney noted, I am an anthropologist by training, and I have devoted the bulk of my scholarly career to understanding, to examining, to documenting, to researching the patterns of global migration with a focus on the context in which migrants leave, the transitions, and the settlement and the adaptation processes of immigrant families, and above all, children, as they move to various destinations. I have conducted more or less permanently funded research on the topic of migration, both in the Commonwealth as well as in the West Coast and in the state of New York. Research funded over the years by the National Science Foundation, by the W.T. Grant Foundation, the Spencer Foundation, and many, many other of the large foundations in our country. A decade ago, approximately, I moved into administration, appointed dean of UCLA's oldest school, the Graduate School of Education and Information Studies, essentially two schools that under the leadership of Chuck Young were combined, the old School of Education and the old School of Library Sciences. After a decade of extraordinary learning and extraordinary opportunities, the opportunity to become chancellor of the University of Massachusetts, Boston, came before me. Without any hesitation, I jumped at the idea of returning to the Commonwealth, returning to the state where my children grew up, across the river in Cambridge, where the challenge, where the issues facing public higher education in our country are unfolding with great clarity and some concern, where the opportunities are so significant and so important. I was lucky, blessed to be selected, and I am here as a chancellor and have began the journey of leading our university through extraordinarily difficult times. A few thoughts. I also like you to know that I am an immigrant to our country. I am an immigrant from Latin America. I was born in Argentina to a family of educators. I came to the United States as a young man by myself, age 17. And Uh, Looking back, I am fundamentally, as an academic, the product of the so-called California Master Plan developed by the great Clark Kerr. I'm a child of Clark Kerr's master plan for the California system. I started in community college and had the opportunity to transfer to that other great public research university, the University of California, Berkeley. And Berkeley formed me as a scholar, as an academic, as a public intellectual, and as an administrator. That's item one, a little bit about my background. Let's turn now, in very broad terms, to the state of the university today. And what I see as my priorities now, then we will turn to matters pertinent to what I see moving forward. First, I'm happy to say that in the context of extraordinary uncertainty, in the context of so much suffering, so much death, so much loss, the university, our university, is in good shape. I am happy to report that Interim Chancellor Newman, who had been my classmate at Berkeley, we graduated a year apart, both with doctorates in anthropology. We were colleagues at Harvard, we were colleagues at Princeton, has left the university as she migrated back to One Beacon to assume her responsibilities as systems chancellor in good shape. The budget is in order. The house is in order. Our budget is strong in the context of the extraordinary undertow that we're all facing. We have been able to develop a budget that is in line with the Office of the President and the trustees framework for the development of the budget at all our University of Massachusetts system campuses. I am also happy to say that the state of enrollment at UMass Boston today is strong. Our students have, again, voted with their feet. Today, the enrollment is more or less exactly where it was a year ago today. In the context of anticipating significant disturbance, significant turbulence, significant undertow, I am happy to report that while the mix of students is different from what it was a year ago, the total numbers are quite stable, meaning we have, like all other campuses, seen significant losses in the enrollment of international students. And this, of course, represents a problem. It represents a problem for the ethos and the eidos of the university. Our foreign students are an integral part of the culture of intellectual engagement, of vigorous, rigorous debate, and we have seen a significant decline in the number of international students. In addition to affecting the mixed and the culture and the practices of life in the university, the international students also pay a differential fee. Therefore, while the numbers, where we have a stasis in the total number of enrolled students, the mix is not as favorable as it could be given the differential fees that international students pay. But the budget is in order, enrollments are in order. In general, these are very broad indicators of the general health of our university. We are, in the context of the enormous stresses in every university, public, private, in our country, the House is in good shape. And again, I am grateful to Interim Chancellor Newman. I'm grateful to Interim Provost Emily McDermott. We're going to hear from Emily shortly. And I'm grateful to the senior leadership for their endeavors, often with blood, sweat, and tears, to keep the university in safety as we face enormous stresses. As I see my priorities today, they fall, broadly speaking, into three domains. First, numero uno, as we say in the old country, maintaining, protecting the territory we have been able to gain under the previous administrative leadership. It's of uttermost importance to me to maintain the stability, both in terms of the finances and the budget, also, of course, in terms of enrollment, and in terms of the working of the university and our mandate to offer our students the best education we can, again, under these most unfortunate of circumstances. So I would say that's numero uno, is maintaining and protecting the territory we have been able to gain through very, very difficult years, particularly over the last a couple or 3, really 4 years. Second, of course, it's the matter of protecting the health and protecting the wellness of our students, of our faculty, and of our staff. We are facing, dear colleagues, a wicked pandemic. We are learning a great deal, but the virus is also learning and it's also evolving. And safety is my grave concern in all of our endeavors. And by safety, in a Cartesian sense, I see a kind of a binary logic here. Safety as a medical construct, qua the virus, safety also in the context of the mental health concerns that have now invaded nearly every aspect of work, of life in institutions, of families, excuse me. And if you look at the data, mood disorders, anxiety, depression, all are skyrocketing. If you look at the data on suicidality, if you look at the data on suicides, if you look at the data on the addictions, if you look at the data in terms of alcohol and in terms of drugs, we're seeing just the devastation on the wake of the pandemic that suggests that health, mental health, safety and wellness has to be an extraordinary priority. So if maintaining the territory we've gained and providing safety to our faculty, to our staff, and to our students, these are live in synergy in fundamental ways, and these are concerns that are my first thought when I wake up in the morning, my last thought when I go to bed at night, and I will briefly give you an update on what we're doing in those domains. The third issue, of course, is an issue that is very complicated with enormous uncertainty. And that is, we're now entering remote teaching and learning 2.0. And this endeavor has been an extraordinary, has been a Herculean effort to migrate all teaching and learning to remote. Not since the monks gathered in Bologna 1,000 years ago, or the Prussians invented chalk and talk education, have we seen a change in the basic endeavors of teaching and learning as what the pandemic has forced us to do. We had a dime to move the bulk of our teaching and learning, excuse me, to remote. It's very interesting to reflect upon the fact that the two universities I know best, Harvard, where I was a professor for a decade, and NYU, where I was a dean for a decade, almost a decade, ended up in exactly the same place as our university. Meaning today, over 90% of all our teaching is done remotely. A small percentage of teaching and learning is done in the context of face-to-face, bricks and mortar mode. This has required an extraordinary effort on the part of our faculty and in the part of our staff. Here is the concern I have today. How do we ensure that our faculty, our staff, and our students have all the vehicles, all the tools they need to make sure that our students who come from our most underserved communities, both in the peninsula, in the city of Boston, in the Commonwealth, remain connected, remain engaged, remain bonded, so they can make the necessary progress for reaching their dream of a college degree. And how then do we fight Zoom fatigue? How long can we maintain the teaching and learning in ways that are what in Latin we would say contra natura, not part of the regular business of how we have structured over 1,000 years teaching and learning? So these are some of the broad domains. I'm happy to say we were able to put in all the necessary structures to proceed with online for the fall term. And perhaps our provost will mention this. We've empaneled a committee to advise the cabinet and the chancellor on what will unfold in the context of the winter and the spring in terms of teaching and learning. Will we remain remote, or are we moving, or are we able to make adjustments on the structures and the strictures we have put in place now? We've have brought in a small number of students to our dorms. Again, the first principle here that guided all our thinking flows from what can we ensure in the rest halls for safety, for proxemics, for hygiene, for the behavioral management that is essential to avoid the more destructive aspects of the pandemic. The rest halls have room for about 1,000 students, a little over 1,000 students. We've been able to, with safety and with the instructions of the health authorities, both in the city and in the Commonwealth, to onboard about a third. And the criteria that we put in place as the following. Students will be in single occupancy rooms, and students will be in single, with their own private restrooms. We've tested, we've onboarded safely all our students. The process went very, very well. I was very, very proud visiting and witnessing the arrival of our students. We have tested every student upon arrival. We are now in a regime of testing where our students in the residential halls are tested once a week, which we believe is, given the capacity and our ability to provide them with single occupancy, single bathroom, this is the gold standard for ensuring as humanly as possible the safety of the students in our residential halls. In terms of moving forward, the uncertainty is so great that I am proceeding with a great deal of caution. There is so much uncertainty. Our Commonwealth does not have a budget as of today. We can control certain aspects of the budget having to do with costs and having to do with student enrollment. We cannot, and we don't yet have a clear sense of when the Commonwealth will have a budget, and every hour that passes without a budget, if there are cuts coming forth, the cuts will be more painful to implement, because what's typically a year process is most likely be interrupted until after the US election. That means if we have a budget by the cuts are so much more painful than cuts that have to be executed over the entire academic year. My most important undertaking now is the appointment of a permanent University of Massachusetts Boston provost. I am grateful to Emily for her long, distinguished service to our university. We have in panel a committee. The committee is busy, is reviewing applications. I'm happy to say that the interest has been enormous in this position. I believe that we are at over 75 excellent candidates that have submitted their applications. I have in panel a committee with stakeholders from throughout the university to review the applications, to suggest a short list. I will interview the members in the short list, and I will make a selection from the shortlist developed by the search committee, and we are hoping to onboard the next permanent provost January 1st or around that date. The second immediate priority is, for me, is the development of a UMass Boston master plan. The master plan, the current master plan needs to be revised given the extraordinary changes in our economy and in our society. And I will begin the work of developing the vehicles to put in place the structures for a new master plan that would include 3 domains. First, our vision, our ambition for the academic, scholarly, scientific, humanistic future of our campus. Flowing from that bedrock will then be the 2 other fundamental prongs, the matter of buildings and grounds, and the matter of a capital campaign for us to gather the resources we would need to be the architects of our own destiny. I am grateful to you for your service. I am grateful to you for your commitment and for your contributions to our university. I am grateful to you for the generous support for the Faculty Career Development Award Fund that celebrates that which is at the heart of a public research university, and that is scholarship at the highest levels of excellence, teaching and service to our university, to our city, to the Commonwealth, as well as to the disciplines from which we carry forth the work of scholarship. I am grateful for the time and for the opportunity. I hope and look forward to meeting you in a more humane context, face to face. And I will now, I have to run to another meeting, unfortunately. I am happy to, we don't have time now to take questions or comments, but my doors are always open. Feel free to send me questions, recommendations, suggestions. I would greatly, greatly appreciate it. Again, as we say in the old country, muchas, muchas gracias.
Thank you, Chancellor Suarez Orozco, for your wonderful remarks and for showing the retired faculty where you expect to take the university next. I think we're all excited about the future, even if it's going to be virtual for a little while, and very excited to see where the university can go at this point. I wish we were able to be in the campus center in person today, but I'm grateful that we have the technology to gather remotely instead. Thanks so much for joining us. The retired faculty get together is always one of my favorite moments because it gives me a chance to see people that were my friends, my colleagues, and in many cases, my mentors before they retired. I'd like to take this opportunity first to acknowledge the faculty who have most recently retired, the faculty who have moved into retirement this past academic year. You'll remember some of these people, I'm sure. College of Education and Human Development, Felicia Wilczynski, who was the Associate Dean, a former interim dean of the college, and a member of the Counseling and Psychology Department. Joan Arches from the Curriculum and Instruction Department, formerly of the College of Public and Community Service. In the College of Liberal Arts, Donaldo Macedo from Applied Linguistics, Sean O'Connell from English, Lloyd Schwartz from English, Tom O'Grady from English, they took a hit last year, Charles Meyer from Applied Linguistics, Chuck, as everyone called him, David Hunt from History, Sia Makimova Haiti from Sociology, Jacqueline Carlin from Classics and Religious Studies, Sylvia Mignon from Sociology, also formerly of CPCS, Jane Adams from Psychology, Nushin Ashrafi from the College of Management in the Management Science and Information Systems Department, from the College of Science and Math, Benjamin Malo in Physics, Kamal Bawa in Biology, Bob Carter in Chemistry, and Greg Beck in Biology. And from the School for the Environment, Bob Bowen and Bill Robinson. I'd like to congratulate all of these newly retired faculty, extend my best wishes to you in this new chapter of your lives. Our university is grateful to them and to all of you, retired faculty, for all that you've done to advance our public higher education mission. We're also grateful to those of you who come back and serve post-retirement in part-time teaching appointments or who serve as campus ambassadors promoting faculty and student achievements. And as the Chancellor has just said, I will note that I am coming soon into your ranks. I will be retiring as of January 1st this year. Serving as interim provost in the midst of a pandemic and anti-racism protests in the city and the nation, it has presented us on campus, as well as those in other colleges and universities, with an unprecedented set of challenges. I think we've done an amazing job. The faculty have worked, they worked suddenly and intensively over spring break to make a move to remote modality, which was a shock for everybody. We did a pretty darn good job of it, I think, but then we had to work more over the summer, and faculty, IT, everybody tucked in to figure out how to make sure that when we came back remotely in the fall, we would do it in a way that was really as good, as close to the same engaging experience as we are able to give our students face-to-face as possible. The chatter around town is always, oh, how do you do this with Zoom, or what do you do to use technology to stop students from academic dishonesty and to guide them into academically honest behaviors. How do you deal with Zoom bombing? That's always a great problem if it happens. And so everybody's become much more technologically savvy than they ever really wanted to be. And I think the faculty have done a spectacular job of working through this situation. As the Chancellor mentioned, we've just put together a group that's going to be recommending what we do for the spring. It's all very dependent. It's all got, the recommendations at this point have to be scenario planning, because we don't know what the scenario will be in the world around us for the spring. But I'm certainly imagining there may well be hybrid it may be a hybrid experience again in the spring. Right now we're about 94% remote. We have about 18 classes that are either fully face-to-face, very few of those, or partially face-to-face. We've had to put in some experiences for new international students that are face-to-face to meet the guidelines from the Department of Education for a face-to-face component. But basically, we've been very heavily remote. And I think that the experience that our fellow colleges and universities around the country are having this fall have made me feel as if we really made the right decision in deciding to be very, very heavily remote. We have not had any of the outbreaks that other campuses have had to deal with. And we've got our fingers crossed that that's gonna stay true, but I think it's working so far. I'd also like to thank each of you who contributed to the Faculty Career Development Fund. As of July 31st, the endowment had a fair market value of $222,000. To date, we've received more than $2,000 in contributions this fiscal year. I'd like to thank everyone who has donated to the fund. Finally, I join Chancellor Suarez Orozco and my colleagues in congratulating last year's and this year's Faculty Career Development Award recipients, Professor Patania, Johnston, Rockledge, and McHugh. I look forward to hearing from each of you. Thanks again for joining us today. It's been wonderful to see your faces in Hollywood Square modality, and I look forward to seeing you in person when it becomes safe again to do so. Now turning it over to retired Professor Steve Schwartz from psychology, who will tell us about the Retired Faculty Leadership Council. Steve?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Emily. I have been asked to say a few words to acquaint you with your Retirement Faculty Leadership Council and its work. We typically meet once each semester, currently over Zoom. We select a subcommittee to review the applications from tenure-track junior faculty for the awards of typically $3,000 to $5,000 that come from the Endowed Faculty Career Development Fund, which began over 20 years ago with grants from Professor Joel Blair of the English Department and Ruth Butler of the Art Department. During this time period, virtually all our awardees, representing many disciplines and colleges, have gone on to exceptionally productive careers, primarily here at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. This morning, we will be privileged to hear two examples of the work that these modest grants have been able to support. Secondly, at these meetings, we also receive reports from the provost and other university administrators and faculty on significant initiatives and challenges relating to the university. We also endeavor to promote the growth of the endowment, typically by writing a letter to all of our retired faculty colleagues, as well as encouraging additional contributions from the Office of the Provost and Chancellor. Recently, we emailed all retired faculty a questionnaire concerning their thoughts on additional positive contributions to the university. Retired faculty and the retired faculty and the Retired Faculty Leadership Council might become involved in. We will be discussing these additional possibilities with the provost in the near future. Finally, on behalf of the Retired Leadership Council, the Retired Faculty Leadership Council, I invite any of you who might be interested in joining the council to email either myself, that's steve.schwartz@umb.edu, or Judith Goldman, that's judith.goldman@umb.edu, and we will be in touch to talk with you about possibly joining the Retired Faculty Leadership Council. Thank you very much. I guess there's no time for questions, so Jack, do you take over now again?
We'll move
No.
on to Marty Quit.
Oh. Is there a question or something?
Marty is up, I believe.
Oh, okay.
Hello? Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, good morning. I'm Martin Quitt, Professor Emeritus of History and longtime member of the Retired Faculty Council. Hi, Heather. In any case, this is the first luncheon award ceremony I've been able to attend in a few years, because the first Friday in October is often the beginning of our Boston Symphony subscription series, where I usually see Lloyd Schwartz. In fact, I've seen him at Symphony Hall more than I've seen him anywhere else in the last 10, 15 years. Anyway, it's my pleasure to introduce our Faculty Career Development Award recipients from last year, from 2019, who present their research findings. Our first speaker is Assistant Professor of Biology, Shaya Patania. She's in the faculty for the Center for Personalized Cancer Therapy. Her research focuses on determining how and why mutations of the BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes have predisposed women to the early development of breast and ovarian cancer. In particular, her laboratory studies show how mutations in these genes disrupt DNA damage repair pathways and thereby promote tumor initiation. I coincidentally, sadly, add that my daughter's best friend is having this month a double mastectomy prophylactically, because she has a BRCA gene. Dr. Patania has published more than 20 peer-reviewed scientific papers and has received current and past grant funding from the National Institutes of Health, from the Department of Defense, and the Susan G. Komen Foundation. She joined UMass Boston in 2016 after completing a postdoc fellowship at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. Professor Patania earned a doctorate in molecular genetics from the University of Texas at Austin, a master's degree in biotechnology from the Indian Institute of Technology, and an undergraduate degree in chemistry from Aranda House at Delhi University. Her faculty career development grant supported her research on the project titled "The Role of DNA Damage Repair in Suppressing Breast and Ovarian Tumor Genesis." Professor Patania, please tell us about your research.
Thank you very much, Martin. That was a fantastic, can you all hear me? Okay, yes. So that was a very generous introduction. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate that. I'm going to share my screen and I'm hoping it'll work right away. Does this show up as full screen for everybody?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. So I have 6 or 7 minutes that have been allotted to me. So I am not going to drown you all with too much science, but I want to leave you with an idea of what my group does and what we have been doing. But before I get into that, I would like to start by just thanking this group here that has supported some of this early work and for the Faculty Career Development Award. Not just for the funds, but also the encouragement. And I think that is much appreciated. Okay. The overall topic is replication stress as a driver of breast and ovarian cancer. And as I said, I'm going to introduce you to what the lab does and what we have done in this last year, a little bit introduction to that. And before I get into that, just want to point out that BRCA1 and BRCA2 mutations are very heavily predisposed women to breast cancer and ovarian cancer. And my group almost exclusively works on BRCA1 and BRCA2. And what I'm showing you here is what the risk in general population is, showing here in blue, and then in purple, what's the risk, which tops almost at 87% for women who have BRCA1 and BRCA2 mutation, forcing them to go for prophylactic mastectomies and oophorectomies just to be able to suppress that risk for cancer. So we definitely don't have a solution in place just yet. And that is the focus of my laboratory. I wanted to also point out that the risk, though, for women is the highest, there's still a risk for men, especially for prostate cancer or for the male breast cancer for BRCA2 mutation carriers. And there is now more and more evidence that pancreatic cancer and melanoma are other 2 forms of cancer that are also higher in this risk family. So the focus with that in mind for my group are 2 important ones. One is, of course, to identify novel therapeutic strategies for these women who have such high risk for cancer, but to also identify those very early drivers that push the normal cell in these women to become tumor cells, so that we can take away from the table the only preventive option as a prophylactic surgery as the only preventative option for this woman, and actually offer some new novel ways to help these women. Now we do have to get a little bit into the science aspect, and I'm going to keep it as simple as possible here. The 2 proteins, BRCA1 and 2, are really big size proteins and have what's called many different domains which carry out many different functions in the cell. The one that my group focuses on is DNA damage repair function. What it simply means is that these 2 proteins help repair DNA as it gets damaged. And damaged DNA is one of the earliest precursors for cancer. If your DNA is damaged, the cells are definitely headed towards a bad outcome. And quite often that outcome is cancer. So these 2 proteins help repair the DNA. So you can imagine if these women have mutations in these genes, their DNA is not very well repaired. So one of the earliest bits that started us down this path was my work at Dana-Farber, where we found that BRCA1 and BRCA2 repair a specific kind of DNA damage, and that's called stalled replication forks. Basically, as your cell is replicating DNA and the replication fork encounters a lesion on the DNA, it usually will repair itself. But because BRCA1 and BRCA2, which are, we found, important players in this repair pathway, when they are not present, it leads to really bad outcome in the cell. So a normal cell with BRCA1 in it will repair it very efficiently, but not if it has a mutation in this protein, making it a minus for BRCA1 here, leading to mutagenesis and presumably cancer. So just some bits of data that has come out in the last couple of years from the lab. What we have found is that BRCA1 and BRCA2, though we like to club them together, they do carry out different functions in DNA damage repair. So here what I'm showing you is what we had recently published, and I'll talk about that in the next couple of slides quickly, is that our first indication was, we found that this, what I'm looking at here and what I'm showing you here is looking at the stalled fork. So we look at it, we can visually look at how the repair is happening at stalled forks by looking at DNA fibers. So we have this technology set up in the lab, and we look at how the fibers move in terms of their replication capabilities the fibers collapse or they break down, they become smaller if you have a mutation in BRCA1 or BRCA2. But what we found was that even though they have similar functions, they carry out these functions differently. And it becomes important to parse out these differences because these women don't always have the same predisposition to cancer and the same predisposition to the kind of cancer. So there are differences and we are trying to parse them out. What I'm trying to show you here, and I wanted to show you this piece of data because this forms the foundation for the research we are doing in the last year and a half now, is that we found there's a specific protein called replication protein A or RPA that seems to be differently accumulating at the stall folks in absence of BRCA1 versus in absence of BRCA2. Simply put, in absence of BRCA1, it doesn't get to the cells, but in absence of BRCA2, not only does it get to the cell, it gets it at even higher concentration. And it stays on in the cell at the site of damage, which is shown here. So this formed the basis of the work, and I'm going to cut a lot of work together in this final model. So this work was almost 2 years worth of work, and Hahui Duan, who's a graduate student in my lab, we just published this paper in Journal of Cell Biology. And what her work shows now to us is this beautiful specific pathway that BRCA2 is a part of. What we find is that in absence of BRCA2, the folks get stuck at this stage where they have RPA accumulated. Not only is it accumulated, it's ubiquitinated, a particular modification. We know the protein that does this ubiquitination, it's called RFWD3, and that this fork is a very unstable structure, tends to collapse, causes a lot of double-strand breaks, which are just really bad mutagenic events in the cell, and that's a bad outcome. So what is the current work that we are focusing on? And this is the work that the faculty grant also contributed towards. We basically asked, this intermediate we know is bad, but why is it bad? Can we pinpoint? And the reason we want to pinpoint is because if we know why this intermediate has a bad outcome, cancer being the bad outcome, we can stop it in its tracks. So that is the focus of the lab, is to take mechanistic findings and extrapolate it to therapeutic options. So we have certain hypotheses. I'm not going to go into the details of it in the interest of time, but we are testing all these different hypotheses of why this intermediate could be a bad intermediate. And the way we are doing that, this data is something we recently got and also is the foundation of some of the grants we are submitting now. We believe this RPA that gets stuck at the stall folks makes the cells defective in a new, entirely not known yet repair pathway for BRCA2. And that is exciting because now we can target this defect in the BRCA2 tumor cells, mutant tumor cells. Just summarizing this data here and maybe just have you look at this one. Olaparib or PARP inhibitors are a known treatment option for BRCA2 women. We are proposing a new treatment option in a drug called irofulven, and that targets this particular repair pathway that our mechanistic studies over the last few months have pointed. What's very exciting for us right now is that this is a breast tumor line that we derived from a breast tumor we got from Dana-Farber. This particular tumor doesn't respond too well to olaparib, all right to irofulven, but if you combine the two and do this particular combination therapy, now you see that you almost kill 50% of the tumor cells. The reason I'm showing you this data is because this is the kind of work we are headed towards by understanding mechanistic basis of what's happening in these cells as they don't have these proteins. Now, I want to take the next couple of slides to wrap up this final thought that we are also asking what's happening in the normal cells of these women before they become the tumor cells. And to carry out that study, we are collaborating with Dr. Judy Garber and Deborah Dillon at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. And we get these prophylactic tissues, mastectomy tissues that come in from women who are taking this step of going through prophylactic surgeries. So these are presumably normal cells from these women. They don't have tumor. And the questions we are asking is, are any of those hypotheses I listed before of the kind of defects, are they already happening in the normal cells of these women? So those are some of the studies that are going on. We are also carrying out mouse-based studies in the lab here at UMass. So we have a mouse where we inject, so Joshua Rivera is another graduate student in the lab. we inject the drug directly into the duct, the nipple of the mice. And the question is the replication stress, which is caused by these defects in DNA damage repair pathway. Can it cause cancer in these normal tissue of the mice? And I'm not going to go explaining this data right now, but happy to answer any questions if anybody wants. But what we found was that yes, we can make tumor, and it makes the tumor faster than a mouse that did not have a BRCA1 mutation, and that we have identified a specific, what we call the cancer stem cells in the breast tissue of these mice before the tumor is formed. And we are excited about that. This work for single cell RNA sequencing, where we are sequencing every cell of that breast tissue that we isolated. This was done here in-house in the Genomic Core facility at UMass Boston. And the data is very promising right now, and we are working on it as we speak. Now, in the last 1 minute, I'm going to bring it all together in terms of the different funding we have to do this form of research. So the current funding I have is from Department of Defense, as well as from NIH, that's looking at different aspects of BRCA1 and 2 cancer. And what I am excited about is the future. We have applied for a lot of grants this year, and some of these projects also were helped by the funding we got from the Faculty Career Award. So we have applied for 4 different grants already, and they are all based on some very strong preliminary data that has come out. And I didn't get a chance to talk about all of it in interest of time. I've just put a star against this 5th one because this is a pilot study that we had proposed for a U54 Cancer Research Partnership Grant, and the pilot has been selected by the committee for the full application. So we have a lot of work in front of us, and we have applied for a lot of funding, and we are really hoping to bring it all home. And this year, we also published some of the work that was carried out in the last 1.5 to 2 years. Hui Duan, graduate student at UMass Boston. Sarah and Margaret were the undergraduate students here at UMass Boston, and the work was published in Journal of Cell Biology. And we also recently published a review article, and the work, some of the collaborations have also resulted in publications. And finally, I would like to thank my group. They have been a fantastic support all through, and especially these last few months when we have just opened up, and they have made time and made effort to come back to the lab to do research. They are all eager. They are all excited about the different projects they are working on. So Hahui, Pamoda, Josh, and Kathy are my 4 graduate students. These are undergraduate students in the lab. We also get help from Makaska Lab and SciLab that are also part of the CPC team, and our collaborators, and the different funding support that we have received. So thank you all very much. And I don't know if I'm allowed to answer any questions, but I'll be happy to if anybody has. Thank you.
We're going to save questions for the end.
Well, thank you, Professor Botania. Yeah, that was a very exciting presentation. And needless to say, we wish you continued success. It's now my pleasure to introduce our other faculty development grant recipient from last year, Assistant Professor of Political Science, Travis Johnston. His research and teaching interests concern questions of legislative institutions, policy making, and electoral politics. How relevant. Prior to coming to UMass Boston, also in 2016, Professor Johnston served as a congressional staffer as part of the American Political Science Association's Congressional Fellowship Program. While on the Hill, Professor Johnston worked on a diverse set of issues ranging from education and workforce development to criminal justice reform. He's interested personally and professionally in the role education plays in adapting social policy, in shaping social policy outcomes. His research interests are informed by his experiences as a middle school special education teacher and teaching courses on American government and US history for the Prison University Project at San Quentin. His scholarship has been published in PS, Political Science and Politics, Studies in American Political Development, and the Presidential Studies Quarterly. his chapter, Presidential Nominations, Factional Conflict, and Prospects for Democratic Party Reform, appear in the 2020 text, American Political Development and the Trump Presidency. Professor Johnston is a 3-time graduate of the University of California, Berkeley, where he earned his doctorate and master's degrees in political science and his undergraduate degree in political science and history. He also holds a master's degree in special education from George Mason University. His faculty career development grant supported the completion of his book project, All Politics is National Perception and Representation in a Partisan Era. His grant supported the completion. All right, I'm sorry for repeating that. All right, let me now introduce Professor Johnston, and who will present his research. Professor
Good
Johnston?
morning, folks. Yeah, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Let me share my screen. All right. Thank you for that kind introduction, Marty. I'm going to, as you alluded to, talk a little bit about my book project, All Politics is National, Perception and Representation in a Partisan Era. And before I jump in, I want to thank the retired faculty group for the career development grant. It was integral to the completion of a coding project, which is still being analyzed. You'll see some preliminary results today that not only supports my book, but also supports numerous other projects that I have ongoing with collaborators at UMass Boston and elsewhere. So as many of you probably picked up, the title of my book is a nod or a tip of the hat to Speaker Tip O'Neill, speaker from the 1970s into the 1980s from the great Commonwealth of Massachusetts, served in the House for over 30 years for Massachusetts. And Tip O'Neill coined this phrase, or at least is famously attributed with having used this phrase to explain that politics is really the art of the local and trying to ensure that re-election members of Congress, even federally elected officers, tend to focus primarily on the local aspects of their job and focus on the local needs of their constituents, delivering the stuff, the goods that constituents care about. And that's usually thought of in terms of two major things, pork and casework. So casework is the classic idea of solving a problem, chasing down a Social Security check that did not show up and ensuring that somebody's livelihood is guaranteed by the state. Pork is the big wasteful spending projects or appropriate spending projects that members of Congress like to point at some shiny new building and say, were it not for me, you would not have this new bridge. You would not have this new factory. You would not have this new school. And typically we have thought, particularly in the congressional literature, that this is the bread and butter that gets members of Congress reelected, that this is what drives voters to the ballot box. But these notions, like when Tip O'Neill was coining the phrase, all politics is local, is really speaking to an era far different from the world we live in today. And when we think about Congress today, we typically think about the national policy debates that animate voters, activists, interest groups, and other policy demanders that pay most attention, are the most likely to hold their government accountable, and are the most engaged and the most active in terms of elections and donations and lobbying government. And so here's a shot looking at a gun debate, but even this gun debate I think is telling in that when we think about the politics that animate Washington, D.C. and our elected officials, we don't think about one issue at a time. Even at this gun debate, you have somebody's holding up a sign with an image having to do with reproductive justice. And this is really entangled in our politics, that we think about office holders from these national policy debates. We are not thinking about our elected official from a brass tacks, what have you done for me lately in terms of delivering the goods in the district. This is just not how individuals, whether they are average voters or the most engaged activists and interest groups, tend to think about office holders and think about holding their office holders accountable. So the motivating question of my project, and really in particular today's discussion, is do members of Congress continue to emphasize their local record, or are national issues more important in today's political climate? And so in engaging this question, I want to highlight three key features that I think are crucial to understanding the nationalization of US politics. And my book project in general interrogates each of these three pieces more in depth. So first off, office holders have polarized ideologically. Between the 1960s and the present, the degree to which the parties, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, have sorted to opposite poles of the ideological spectrum is quite striking. And when you think about Tip O'Neill serving from the 1950s to the 1980s, and indeed when we talk about Tip O'Neill in today's politics, we oftentimes discuss it alongside his negotiations with Ronald Reagan, held up as this great example of bipartisanship, right? Negotiating over tax bills and whatnot. That is not the world we live in today. We are not talking about President Trump and Nancy Pelosi negotiating over tax bills. They haven't spoken in months. So we do not think about our elected officials in this, kumbaya bipartisan moment. Voters similarly know this, and they have sorted accordingly. Even if voters have not necessarily polarized and grown more extreme in their ideological views, it's much easier to see what the Democratic Party stands for and what the Republican Party stands for respectively, and then sort accordingly. Coming out of Tuesday's debate, there was a panel of undecided voters put on by a Republican consultant, Frank Luntz, and he asked them at one point, how, after watching 90 minutes of that, are you still undecided? And that is, I think, indicative here that when we think about national politics, when we think about our elected officials, it's very clear what the options look like. It's very clear, and voters have sorted accordingly. And the third key feature, and the third key element to my book project, is not just looking at the politics today from the perspective of office holders and voters, but also enriching that with a discussion of policy demanders. And policy demanders is a much more broad term that allows for activists, interest groups, these actors that are integral to understanding how office holders are held accountable, how they're selected in the first place. And the takeaway from these three key features for understanding how politics have nationalized is that members of Congress are selected and evaluated on national policy terms, not these local issues, not these local delivering goods for their constituency per se. Of course, that still matters. Having worked for Senator Patty Murray, I know that we were answering the phones and thinking about how this will impact Boeing or an average constituent. But that said, when you think about your member of Congress, when those member of Congress are being held accountable at the ballot box, it's typically on these national policy terms. And so the question for today's talk, and something that the generous Faculty Career Development Fund has been able to support, is asking this question: do members of Congress' words on the campaign trail reflect this fact? And so what I did with the resources, when I helped finish paying for a coding project of looking at all congressional advertising from 2008 through 2016. And so the Wisconsin Advertising Project, and then later on the Wesleyan Media Project, has already coded all political ads from every campaign during this window. But they do not code these ads. They code them for various things having to do with what candidates, how they're presented, what they talk about, how many candidates are in the ad. Using the resources provided by the Faculty Career Development Grant, I was able to go through and code all of these ads a second time, but going through and coding for things that are relevant to my project. And so I looked at all candidate-sponsored ads from 2008 to 2016, and this comprises thousands of unique ads, more than 10,000 ads, and millions of airings. So when this project is over, I'll have a massive data set that is extremely rich in terms of how much money was spent on these ads, what time of day are these ads being aired, how are candidates allocating their resources across different types of ads, across different media markets, if they straddle multiple media markets as senators do. And these data are pretty compelling for making the case that members of Congress have moved in this more national direction. First off, these data, members of Congress face a budget constraint. Candidates for office face a budget constraint when they choose to use money to to advertise. And so I can actually get a real sense of how they're thinking about their representation, how they want to present themselves to their constituents. And crucially, these ads are not cheap talk. When candidates for office talk about what they're doing, other studies have found that this indeed reflects to some degree what they are doing in office, or at least how they prioritize their time in office. So the team, which is a team of graduate students from McCormick Graduate School, went through and coded every one of these ads, and they look at, does the candidate reference their record? If so, do they emphasize local or national issues? And among many other factors, they also look at the specific actions taken on behalf of the issue that the office holder or candidate is talking about in the ad. And I just want to give you a real quick slice of what these data suggest. These are overall trends from the 2008 sample, and each cell is looking at the average number of airings by candidate. And for shorthand, I'm calling national issues. If the candidate talked about their national achievements and records, we're calling that policy. And if they're talking about more local issues, they're talking about their local benefits that they've provided to their constituency, we're calling that pork. The N is the sample. And what you see is across the board, by party, chamber, and whether the candidate is a challenger or an incumbent, across the board, candidates are talking much more about their national record or talking about things from a national context. So Democrats, for instance, are talking about the average number of airings talking about policy or national issues is 260 per candidate, or contrast that to 175 per candidate talking about their more local aspects. Same with Republicans. There's approximately a 60 ad difference on average talking about national versus local achievements. Down the line, House, which we typically think of as being more focused on local achievements and not broader national issues, House members are talking more about about national policy, And of course, the Senate candidates in particular are talking a lot more about national policy issues. And this also even carries over to incumbents versus challengers. Even challengers, now the difference is not that great, but even challengers are talking about their record in a broader national policy context rather than a local one. And just one other level of analysis of these data is this question of, does the competitiveness of the district matter? And this is an important question because it's easy to say, well, all right, lots of members are running in safe districts. They can talk about whatever they want. They can talk about policy. They can just be really extreme on policy, pulling the polls even further from one another. But what about those members that are running in those centrist moderate districts where they have to actually really think about, well, what is the best strategy to getting reelected here? Is it true that they're still talking about their local achievements? And I actually find in this, the x-axis here is the partisan voter index, Cook PVI, which is a measure of competitiveness of a district centered on the mean being the median kind of level of competition between Democrats and Republicans based on how presidents do in those districts. And what you see here is just really briefly, this low S smoother is showing that actually the most competitive districts are also talking just as much, if not more, about their policy. That the y-axis is looking at the ratio between the number of airings talking about their national record over all of their airings combined. And indeed, the most centrist districts, that is where we indeed find that members are continuing to push this issue that national policy matters the most. So moving forward, I want to enrich this data set by linking it to legislative behavior. So I will be merging these data with other data on bill introductions, co-sponsorship data, data on legislative effectiveness to see how advertising strategies, again, not just being cheap talk, how they tell us something about what office holders do. Because at its core, this project is about representation, understanding how this growing nationalization of local politics has had perverse consequences for the average voter, the average citizen. In addition to looking at legislative behavior, I'm going to drill down deeper and we're going to have some chapters looking at how specific policies might look more localized or more nationalized over time. And so the coders also went through and looked at specific things like healthcare policy, criminal justice reform, education policy. And we're going to be looking even further at how these policy areas that are oftentimes framed in a local context have become even more nationalized, even in advertising strategies of members of Congress. And then looking at how electoral context shifts these things. Do members behave in different ways if it's a midterm or a general election? does the majority minority party status of the candidate matter for their advertising strategies? Are they going to engage more in partisan vitriol if they're on one side of the majority minority equation? And I want to talk briefly then about the implications that this has writ large. And of course, the book project is much more expansive. This is just one piece looking at office holders, and I'm going to also explore the implications for voters and policy demanders. But it's important to recognize that existing research seems to suggest that candidates in these centrist areas, as I said a second ago, would focus more on their local accomplishments because they do not want to alienate centrists. But my research so far suggests that that's actually a little outdated notion. And at least when they're talking about what they do on TV, when they're advertising, they're selling themselves in a national policy context. And that has big implications for how Washington orients itself. But it's also important to ask, what does this policy look like on TV, on television advertisements, and how much does it actually relate to what they're doing in DC? Because it's one thing to run advertisements talking about your national policy bona fides, but if you're selling that from a more moderate way, which is indeed what most of these ads are doing, particularly in centrist areas, not throwing firebombs about policy, but actually trying to sell your accomplishments, then that's problematic from a representational perspective. There's a real deficit in terms of what people are getting from what is being advertised at them and what DC is providing. And indeed, the biggest takeaway is what are the consequences here for Congress in general? Is Congress more effective? And I think most people can probably guess where we're going to land on this question. But the conventional wisdom has been that by focusing on local at the detriment of national policy issues, Congress doesn't solve the big problems like entitlement reform or making sure that healthcare system works for everyone in general, because members of Congress are focused on just getting that pork, solving problems for their individual constituents. But perversely, we're in a time now where Congress is indeed focused on broader national policy issues, but that doesn't mean that Congress is getting the job done either. And so it's worth moving forward and thinking, what are the policy implications and what types of reforms would our government need to drill back into this broader question of providing good representation for people in general? I'm going to end there, and thank you very much for the support and thank you for your attention.
Thank you. That's another fascinating presentation. I just have to throw this in. I'm in the middle of writing an essay about politics before the Civil War that stresses the importance of localism. And what you're presenting is a world that's totally inverted at that in terms of national politics. Well, after listening to these two presentations, I've been a donor to this development fund for almost my entire retirement, which is close to 2 decades now. And it's so gratifying to hear the quality of these two research young faculty grant recipients. Their work is extraordinary. And the quality of the junior faculty that we now have is just stunning. And if you share my excitement, I hope it'll remind you to contribute to the fund that has helped sustain this kind of work. So it's now my pleasure to turn the mic over to a longtime colleague, Professor Estelle Dish. She's going to talk about the recipients of the award this year. Estelle?
Okay, can you hear me?
Gotcha.
Okay. Impressive work, Professors Johnson and Patania. And thank you for keeping your important work going in the midst of COVID challenges, both on and off campus. I'm trying to imagine what researchers are going through these days, and it makes my brain spin just to think about, especially if you have kids at home. Anyway, I know a lot of faculty are going through tough stuff. My name is Estelle Dish. I'm a retired professor of sociology. Like other retired faculty who spoke before me, I'm a proud supporter of the Retired Faculty Career Development Fund. It's my absolute pleasure to announce this year's recipients of the Faculty Career Development Award. Shannon McHugh is Assistant Professor of Italian and French in the College of Liberal Arts. Matthew Rockledge is Assistant Professor of Marketing in the College of Management. I offer hearty congratulations to each of you on behalf of everyone at UMass Boston, including Chancellor Suarez Orozco, Provost McDermott, your deans, your colleagues, members of the Retired Faculty Leadership Council, and all retired faculty. Professor Rockledge has a BA in Psychology and History from St. Olaf College and a master's and PhD in Social Psych with a Quantitative Analysis minor from Ohio State. He has taught at Northwestern and Northeastern before joining us. Professor Shannon McHugh received her BA from the University of Southern California and a master's and PhD from NYU, all in Italian studies. Prior to coming to UMass Boston, she held a postdoc teaching fellowship at NYU. Both of these award winners have very long and impressive lists of awards, publications, and speaking engagements. Each of these professors will tell us a bit about their projects, starting with Professor Rockledge.
Well, first of all, I got this in the mail yesterday. Oh wait, you can't see. Oh, that's too bad. The virtual background is messing with it, unfortunately. But it's the award that was sent to me. Thank you so much to the committee that selected me and for the donors. Thank you so much. It was such an exciting day to get the award. Just to tell you extremely briefly about the project that I proposed. As many of us probably noticed in the past 5 to 10 years, there's increasing polarization and outrage expressed between groups. And this is especially intensified online and then mirrored and spills over into the real world. And what I propose to study is whether we can identify people that are intensifying this outrage and pulling us apart rather than, their thoughtfulness about the other side's perspective. And I'm approaching this from both a psychology and marketing standpoint. So what I'll be doing is following about 100,000 users on social media in 1 year prior to big controversies that erupted in the past 3 years. So in 2017, there was a Super Bowl advertisement from Budweiser that talked about how the Budweiser founder was an immigrant. And this happened just days after President Trump banned immigration from a number of countries. That caused a big outrage. In 2018, there was advertising from Nike using Colin Kaepernick, the professional football player who kneeled during the national anthem. Nike used him as their spokesperson, and that created a big outrage. And then 2019, there was an advertisement released by Gillette about the Me Too movement and how men need to step up and be better. And the Me Too movement shouldn't be reflective of men in general. And that created a big outrage. So I'll be tracing social media users in the year prior to each one of those controversies and using computational linguistics as well as machine learning to understand who is most likely to contribute to these divisions, to express this outrage when these controversies are occurring, and when they do that and how they do that. So trying to leverage big data, machine learning to better understand these dynamics in the real world. So thank you so much again. I was so excited. Thank you.
Shannon is going to tell us a little bit about her project now.
Hi, thanks for, this is my research assistant. I just want to say I'm so honored to be here. I also was excited. I don't have my award yet, but I happened to be at my parents' house when the news came, and so my parents were very proud of me, and we had a big celebration. I want to extend my heartfelt thanks to the endowed faculty career development donors, whose contributions enable junior faculty like myself to undertake research that might otherwise not be possible. And I would also really like to thank Professor Claudia Esposito, who's the chair of my department, and Dean David Turkla of the College of Liberal Arts, who have been unflagging and enthusiastic in their support of my research the entire time I've been at UMass. My book project, Love and Marriage in Renaissance Italy, is a new history of marriage. Traditionally, historians interested in marriage have located it as essentially an invention of Protestant England around the 17th century. Looking at part of the reason for this is because of the materials we tend to use as historians. We tend to look at things like ecclesiastical edicts and dowry contracts and court proceedings. So exactly, Seamus, it's an outrage. So the things that like these sort of like official top-down documents, as a literary scholar, I look at things like letters and literature, especially love poems. And in doing so, I have, the research that I do shows that we need to date the history of love-based marriage to at least a century earlier, and not a Protestant invention, but I argue actually a shared communal value that is already evident in Catholic Italy, at least in the 16th century. The reason that this is interesting, I mean, if you're a Renaissance nerd like myself, you of course want to know the minutia of the exact date and location of these developments. But as a historian of gender, I'm really interested in understanding accurately the origin and evolution of marriage in the West as we understand it, because by doing so, I believe we can be more intentional in building the gendered society that we want today. And so this generous award from the EFCD will allow me to travel to Italy, I hope, in the next year, and undertake some archival research that I need to do to bring my book to completion. So I just thank you sincerely for the recognition and the opportunity and your attention.
Thank you, Professor McHugh and Professor Rockledge. We wish you the best with your research and look forward to learning about your outcomes next year. I'd like to thank my retired faculty colleagues for your generous support of the Retired Faculty Career Development Fund. As a graduate of Boston State and former faculty member there and here at UMass, I'm deeply committed to our public higher education mission. My wife and I support the Faculty Career Development Fund as a way of helping out the next generation of young faculty. If you haven't made your gift yet to the fund or to any fund at UMass Boston, I encourage you to do so at fundumb.edu/fundf. You should have received a letter in the mail with that information. And brand new this year, in regard to your taxes, is if you take a standard deduction or you do not itemize, you can claim an above-the-line deduction of up to $300 for cash donations to charity that you make in 2020. Normally, you have to itemize on Schedule A to get a tax break for charitable donations. So please consider a gift at umb.edu/fedf, as in Faculty Career Development Fund. Although our formal program has come to a close, you're welcome to stay and mingle in our breakout room session. If you're not staying for the breakout session, this concludes our program and you may exit the event.